After we've done the processing on, all the individual channels, now we can do some processing if necessary, of course, on the buses. So all of the group tracks that, add our tracks together, just like that. So on my drums group, I don't have too much. I have a couple of filters that I will be using to, make the arrangement better, make the transitions better, as I've shown you already. On the sub, I have a sidechain compressor, and I have some tape emulation. So this is an emulation of a tape recorder playback machine, where at the same time, once we plug it onto our track, it's emulating that we have recorded the signal onto a tape and played it back off that tape. So what would happen in that case? Of course, as a tape recorder using tape, to record onto is a physical thing, has a lot of nuances, attached to it. This tries to be a faithful emulation of such a process. So I have used that emulation to apply some of the characteristic, tape compression effect onto my sub bass. Why? Because it's going to create some additional linear harmonics, because this kind of distortion, actually saturation of a tape machine, adds linear distortion, meaning that it adds harmonics that are tied to the fundamental harmonic, which is basically almost the only thing that I have in this bass. I think that using this synthesizer, I have created a few harmonics on top, but this is going to make sure that also while applying that kind of saturation to make it sound warmer, it will also apply some compression in case one of those notes, gets out of hand and it's louder than the others, although that should not happen because this is a synthesizer. This is quite a controlled instrument I'm using. Although I do like the sound of clipping the tape machine, and that is, I think, quite well emulated in this, plugin. So let's see what that sounds like once I overdrive this too much. I'll show you the extreme setting that could happen with this. Let me play this sub solo. So that is the difference between those two. When I turn this off, you can see the difference when I'm enabling and disabling this entire plugin. Doing this is actually just going to disable, I think, one part of this plugin, and that is the tape, emulation. It also does have an emulation of a tube processing device underneath all of this, since that is what, the producers of the plugin wanted, to have that emulation of a tube, since that was the input stage probably, or the output stage for this, for this tape machine they emulated. So by just turning off this, it's not enough. That just turns off the tape emulation, as I'm inclined to believe. Somehow sounds more in the mids, since I'm killing that first harmonic altogether, but that's quite aggressive what I did just there. So this is what I'm going to do, actually. This is what I like. So that's the kind of processing you could do on any of these, tracks that are encompassing like an entire group of instruments you're using. So on these basses that I have right here, going into this bass group, they don't possess any subs. I have that compressor that I've shown you already in the lesson before, so that was also on the group, and I have a sidechain compressor after that. So once all of those have been nicely tamed and controlled to be all quite equal, I have this sidechain compressor which is going to duck those basses every time there is a kick drum playing. So let's hear it without it. Of course, this helps a lot in production, and it also gives us that pumpy feeling, which is really, really, popular in EDM. So even if I didn't have to do that, I would still do that because that's what is expected. That is how the entire genre of music sounds, and that side chaining gives that pumping feeling, which actually makes it feel even more powerful. So I have that, I have some tape, saturation on top of that, adding some harmonics that are not there, and also controlling by going through the tube and tape emulation, which is all inside of this. And what you can notice on all of these tracks also, that I have this NLS processing, that's the nonlinear summing. And what that does is actually emulates a channel strip out of a mixer, out of a mixing desk. Now, it does not emulate any, EQ or compressors or whatever kind of, processing elements we have on a channel strip of a mixing console. It only emulates what that, mixing channel strip sounds like with everything at zero. So there is still some change that happens to each one of those channel strips, and this one doesn't emulate only one, it emulates 3 different mixing desks that have 3 different characters, plus each one of those has all of the channels on that mixing desk emulated separately, since, in analog world, none of those channels on that big desk that you can see in big studios is the same. They all have slight changes to the way they sound, slight nuances, because they're all comprised of electrical components that are not perfect in any way. All of those electrical components containing condensers, maybe even, transistors, coils, whatever they have, they are physical things in a physical world that they never produce exactly, to the detail, the same exact sound. They do have some slight nuances and slight, differences, and this is what some people are after. So I use that to actually try to emulate going through an analog desk, and I have that kind of plugin on each one of these tracks. You can see that NLS channel on each one of those present, just like that. So that is my processing. I am not adding any send effects, reverbs, or anything like that, but I am on this drop synth thing. So you can see that the entirety of all of these synths, it does have, reverbs added onto them, each one of those synths, okay? But at the end of the entire process, I liked the way those sounded. When I needed to glue them into the entire song, just like this, I played them like alone, it was okay. Let me give you an emulation of how that sounded without this. 2026-18. I need to remember those numbers. So I decided myself that after the fact, after all of these have been sent already, sending the entire group to more reverb sounded good. Of course, now I think it really doesn't, but this was my decision at the time. So you could, in fact, send an entire group of sounds just like this. So send the group to some of the return tracks and produce some reverb for the entire group of sounds. Actually, shifting its position in space and creating a different soundstage by moving an entire group of sounds away or closer to the listener. So we could, create space by sending each one of the tracks individually to some reverb or placing reverb on the actual track or delay, but we could do that with the actual group. So the entire bus where all of those melodies go, I could send that to some reverb or some delay, whatever kind of effect, maybe chorus, and, control my entire soundstage of this song that way. By controlling the entire group of sounds, since all of these sounds that are grouped together actually go together because they play together. There is some logic in how I actually group them. They have the same purpose, so I group them together, and then I can control their position in the song, in the soundstage of my song, by adding some, return effects, or actually placing an effect like that on the actual track where they all are routed. So this is something you could do. Anything you could do on a single track, you can do all of those things on your group tracks, but maybe for a different or the same reason. But it's just easier to control if I take an entire group of things that play together, they have the same purpose in my arrangement, in my song, and I control them together by sending them all to some reverb, or compressing them, doing some reductive EQ on them, even additive EQ on them. Sometimes it's easier to manipulate the song since now I have all of these sounds, fixed the way I want them. But after the fact that I have them all grouped up, I can also pull the volume down on some of the groups of sounds that are playing. Now, this makes it easier to control the entirety of the mix without going into, each one of those channels, pulling it down, or selecting all the channels, pulling it down. This way I can control entire groups of sounds that have the same purpose in my song, with, let's say, one fader, one panning knob, one EQ. So this is the purpose of bus processing, controlling more than one element together at the same time. Sometimes this is done out of necessity, because I do want to process sounds together. I want their interaction by being pushed into the same processing unit at the same time, or I just want easier and faster control over the main elements in my song, which I have grouped together just for that reason.